Welcome to the Remake Review, where we talk about movies and their remakes. Today we're going... I don't know what that was.
It isn't Phoenix.
Now that we took care of that, today we're going to talk about The Thing from Another World, released in 1951, and compare it to John Carpenter's The Thing, released in 1982, and to a lesser extent we're going to compare it to the pseudo-remake/sequel, The Thing, released in 2011. All three of these films are based on the novella Who Goes There that was released in 1938. Some beats that these films have in common are location. They all three take place in Antarctica. They also have a saboteur that either destroys the blood at a facility, or cuts the power, or destroys their only way of escape. And also, the monster towards the end ends up being a saboteur by cutting the heat in the facility, trying to kill the humans before the humans can kill it.
Got back inside and blew the generator. 6 hours, it'll be 100 below in here. Well, that's suicide! Not for that thing.
Where they differ greatly is the 1951 film is a straightforward monster film, where the 1982 film is more of a paranoia, suspense, horror film, and then the 2011 film, the reason I'm adding it to this remake review and not calling it really a sequel, it is a sequel, but it kind of follows the same beats as the 1982 film, and essentially by the end is a carbon copy of the 1982 film. So to start out with the comparisons, in the 1951 film, the dialogue of the characters really runs together. It's kind of like they're in an early 1900s radio show, and they speak really fast, and it's hard to understand what they're saying. The dialogue runs together.
You get back with the rest. Don't be silly. It'll cost you drinks, guy. Buy him a beer.
The humor of that film is very dated. In the first 10 minutes, they talk about meeting women at bars and taking them home, and about the dames and things like that. So you get a sense that this is a film made for its time. It doesn't really age very well as we watch it in today's world. They use some very generic dialogue like this.
Voorhees, can you tell what metal that is? I'll need some tools.
Barnes, bring some tools!
And overall, the characters in this film make very stupid decisions. The only reason the monster escapes in the first place is because a character grabs a heated blanket off the floor, can feel that it's heated, and sticks it on the ice where the monster is being held, when his only job was to watch it and make sure that it doesn't defrost. In contrast to that, the 1982 film has great character, and the acting of these characters give you a believable tension throughout the film, like they may actually be in danger of whatever this thing is.
When I've been through a lot, and when you find the time, I'd rather not spend the rest of this winter tied to this couch!
The highlight of this film is Kurt Russell playing R.J. McCready, who may be the highest functioning alcoholic I've ever seen. He even beats a computer at chess, which is to show how...
Cheating bitch.
Oh. Never mind. Well, he's still one of the best characters in all of horror history, and maybe all of cinematic history in general. He is well-rounded. Even with his quirks, they play into the character and make him a compelling character. The rest of the cast is very well-rounded as well. Like I said, you actually feel like they're fearing for their lives, which is something I didn't get from the 1950s version of this film. In their version, they always knew where the monster was. It kind of seemed like the stakes weren't very high. where in this version you do not know who the monster is, where it is, who it could be, what it could be. So that really ups the stakes for this film. In the 2011 version, the characters seem like a carbon copy of characters we've already seen in the previous two films, and they add nothing new to this film, to the franchise in general. They kind of just follow the same beats as what we've already seen, and to me, I'm not normally a big fan of remakes. There are some remakes that are really well done. I'll get to those in later videos, but with this film in particular, we don't see anything new. It's all the same beats that we've seen before.
It is still here.
So even though this film is technically a prequel, in my eyes, it's close enough to the 1982 version to classify it as a reboot, but that's just my opinion. So, the next thing I want to talk about is the creature in the film. It's what we're all here to see. In the 1951 version, it was also supposed to be a shapeshifter to more in line with the novella, but with the limitations at the time, they couldn't accurately do that, so they decided to go with a plant-based monster, and which would be fine. It was definitely fine for the times, but the effects weren't the greatest, so they obscured it in darkness and in the shadows and didn't show it very often. It was kind of like the malfunctioning shark from Jaws, where you don't see it except for here and there, and they try to keep it hidden as long as possible. And since they decided to keep it hidden as long as possible, it's really hard to make out what it actually is.
Looks like a man.
How do you know?
He's got legs and a head. I can see him.
Oh, okay. So since they couldn't do the shape-shifting angle for the character, they essentially turned him into a vampire to raise the stakes a little bit. He needs blood to survive. So in the beginning, he kills off one of the dogs and uses its blood to sustain itself, and it begins killing off the humans, also using their blood. I just want to say props to Marshall Matt Dillon himself, James Arness, who put on the prosthetics for this role. He's a mountain of a man to begin with, and they made him look even bigger, but unfortunately, he was super embarrassed of this role. He thought he looked like a giant carrot, so he didn't even show up to the movie's premiere just because of how embarrassed. He said this was his most embarrassing role he's ever partook in. On the other hand, the 1982 version did go with a shape-shifting entity, and it looks great. I mean, look at this thing.
Clear!
Clear.
One big thing about this creature is, in this movie, the stakes feel so much higher. The intelligence and the ability of this monster make the stakes seem a lot higher than we get in the 1950s version, because whenever it's just a monster and you know where it's at and you can detect it before it gets to you, the stakes are extremely low. But in this film, it could be anybody. Compare that to the 2011 film then, where it's a prequel, and we know, since the Norwegians are being shown that it is a prequel from the beginning, going into it knowing that, you know, the stakes aren't that high because you know who's going to die, you know that there's going to be an axe in the door, you know that somebody's going to slit their wrist, because we've seen that in the 1982 version. So since it's a prequel and we're getting those same beats, it feels like a remake as well, but ultimately it is a prequel, and that cuts all stakes out of the equation. Speaking of the 2011 film, a lot of it got bogged down by really bad CGI. I mean, the CGI in this is really awful, and it's kind of sad. I mean, look at this thing. Practical effects were attempted to be used, but they covered it up like a lot of horror and suspense films did at this time, and even action films to some extent, by putting a bunch of CGI over it, and the movie suffers a lot for that reason. I mean, if in 1982 we could have a film with great CGI like this, then why can't we have that same film style and that same film quality in 2011? The last category I'm going to talk about is horror. The 1951 version is, like I said, more in the vein of a Frankenstein or a Dracula, where you know who the monster is, you can see him, it's a big hulking monster that if it gets out, it can reproduce and create multiple monsters, but ultimately is killed very easily. If you compare it to Frankenstein, where he's trapped in the tower and the tower's burnt down and killed, all they do in this movie is essentially electrocute the monster and the movie's over. They go back to eating lunch in the dining hall because the threat's gone. Now compare that to the 1982 film, where you're on full suspense because anybody could be the thing. Even if you figure out they're not a thing in one scene and they go off screen, chances are that they could be a thing when they come back on screen. So essentially,
Everybody's a suspect!
I know, Randy, I know. Everyone's a suspect, and that's what makes this film a classic horror film, in my opinion. Whenever a movie can put you on the edge of your seat and you don't know who the bad guy is, because it could literally be anybody, that is what horror and suspense is about. Now, when we talk about the 2011 film, it does have the suspense and the whodunit aspect of the 1982 film, but since we know that the only two characters in the future that matter are the two Norwegians at the beginning of the 1982 film, then that kind of guts any emotion or suspense out of this film and makes it to where you don't care about any other characters, because either they're going to escape and live happily ever after, or they're going to die and become the fodder that we see at the Norwegian base in the 1982 film. So whenever I'm rating these films, I would give the 1950s version a C. It is a good film. It was a good film. It's just a product of its time. It was rated the best sci-fi film of the 1950s. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. I wasn't around in the 1950s, and I've been spoiled by, in my opinion, better movies to come just because of our technological advancements through the years. So watch the 1950s version for history's sake and get a taste of what old horror used to be, what old movie making used to be. I definitely think it's worth a watch. The 1982 version, definitely watch it. It's a great film. It's one of my favorite films. I would give it, I would say, an A. It has great special effects, great directing, great cast, and it all comes together to make a great film. And in being a great film, you kind of get a sense that you're part of that crew, and maybe even you're a little bit in danger. The 2011 film, in my personal opinion, I would give a D. You can watch it if you want to know what happened to the Norwegian film that was hinted at the beginning of the 1982 film. But other than that, I think you might be able to skip this one. But if you're into prequels, I think it's a passable prequel. Like I said, I feel like it cuts into more the vein of the remake, just because of all the beats that it's hitting. And since it's a prequel, it has to hit the beats that we know that they're going to hit to put us in the place to start the 1982 film. So it's up to you. Skip it, watch it. It's kind of a toss-up. So that's my video. Comment down below at what remake you want me to cover next, and I'll see you in the next one.